Hi there, let us continue our explanation journey into the advanced work with the emotional field. I will return to the roadmap that I kind of outlined for you on page 6. I will continue with that when we go into the work on self-healing, which will be covered in the last 2 videos of this course. But here in this video, we're going to look into the individual lower field blueprint, or the individual, yes, we can call it lower field blueprint. It's not its real name. It is technically the highest level of the etheric field. It is behind the biofield, and it is what determines the layout of the biofield, the emotional field, and the mental field. And to really understand this, we also need to understand a little bit about alien technology, because that blueprint is created entirely via the use of alien technology. And let us just say extraterrestrial technology, because that gives it a little bit of a different air than just alien technology. And people easily jump into distortion fields where we kind of think in a science fiction modality way of perceiving alien technology. So let us call it extraterrestrial technology to give it a little bit of a more scientific air to it. So when we talk about the hijacking 15 to 16,000 years ago, it's difficult for our brain to conceptualize the idea that these races, as they entered in that linear time set 15,000 years ago, they altered our reality completely. When we look at the sediment and when we look at what reality is made of today and how the world looks today, and if you dig down into the soil, you will see that around that time we were coming out of the last ice age, and that had been there covering the majority of our planet for at least 200,000 years or so. Look it up, the last ice age. And we had the little ice age around 1100 AD, but that is not where I want to go. I want to go with this, where the glaciers literally covered our planet. And they say, well, science can see that stretched for 200,000 years, and before that's kind of the beginning or the end of what we call the regression dynamics of the original true humans that were here. They're already in that state. We talk about the Neanderthals. We have talked about the Cro-Magnon that we have found evidence of that existed around some 40 to 45,000 years ago. And they are technically the closest we get to Homo sapiens. That is the type of humans that developed within the last 10,000 years. So again, even though that this is what science estimates it to be, we kind of say, well, this is again working with the hominid theory that we have developed from these Neanderthals and then developed into the kind of humans we are today. And this is where I scramble it all and say, no, let's think a little bit more within the vicinity of extraterrestrial technology that are capable of moving planets from one system to another. And how do they move a planet? Do they drag it after a craft? No, not at all. They're able to completely dismantle it into all of its components, which are holographic blueprint. Technically a type of template. And from that, they then drag that holographic blueprint, the technologies that will manifest it into another reality, literally as in kind of, if you remember from Star Wars, going back to that one again, where you had this little thing you could, or just, for instance, any movie you can make today where you kind of have a little device you put on the table, you switch it on, and then a holographic image comes up, which you can then interact with. That is very close to how it actually works. But here we are not talking about little devices on the table. We are talking about enormously large cube technology that is also in itself what you can call easily manifested and unmanifested due to this extraterrestrial type of technology that works with the foundational energies of the universal structure, which is what we call 0-point energy. And the first thing that is done is that you literally activate in different ways and forms. You can either do it from a craft, you can do it from another extraterrestrial system, or you can do it from inside or outside a reality field, and you begin to work with the foundation of that reality field. Once science, general science, really begin to understand the components of dark energy and dark matter, which is what they call it now because they are in the dark when they come to scientific explanations. That's why they put it there. It's not because it's the dark universe, because it's very high vibrant and they can see it's in the higher frequency spectrum of our reality compared to the quantum potentials that are at the other end. So it's not that they are not understanding that there is some kind of network out there. They have begun to see evidence of that dark energy is connected in networks. And this is where my explanations begin to take place. I saw that long before science discovered it, but that's because I have this, what you can say, a different perception field than they have. They're just beginning to detect it using machines that are becoming more advanced, where already we can do that using our perception field on the brain level, because we have the neural networks in the brain, and the foundation of all realities are similar to these different types of networks that goes in a lattice modality or pattern, where you have vertical and horizontal lines that can be composed of different forms of energies. And these are the ones that are being scaled up or vibrated up or put into activation. So they create these nodal points, and from the nodal points you put in more energies, which then will begin to create spiral forms, which will then begin contraction dynamics, which science calls gravity, and they'll begin pulling in energies. And all of that is typically done by what we call the nodal point, and that nodal point is very often a sphere of the 0 point energy that is gathered together, hold in between two large cubes that are typically in a higher dimensional setting, where that kind of the point of the top of the cube and the point of the cube below, above and below that, where they want to create a sphere, is then beaming in these two energies, similar to the ideas that we have in our magnetic field, which is also held up by two very large cubes. So if you want to change the energies of a reality field, you change the vibrational state of the two cubes that are keeping up a nodal point, drawing in contraction energies, creating the spiral of energies, which are part of the progression or regression spiral that controls all realities, which has been downsized into what we see as the magnetic field. And I know it's kept being drawn in this torus kind of shape, nice looking, but that is when you really look at the original, or if you look at the energetic prints that science is making, computer generated prints of the magnetic field, you will see it is not that pretty. There is a lot of it's not lines like we are usually seeing it. It is actually, it does work in a torus shape, but it has different density levels to it. Some points, somewhere the gravitational forces are stronger on the planet, other places it is less strong, and all of these variations create what we call a very dissimilar type of magnetic field. So it's not what you're being presented with are always being made more simplistic, similar to as the way I am presenting the fields here with nice concentric circles, but of course reality looks a little bit different. So when we talk about the lower field blueprint, we are in that type of technology as well, where we are drawing in energies together to create the three lower fields. And that is done by cube above and below, or in our case, the upper template level and the lower template level, as it was kind of originally meant. But due to the lower fields and what they are made of, the bottom line is often the elemental beings that are also being kept up by ancient types of technologies that are in the scattered and destroyed LPF1 network of the original planetary system or terrestrial system, because it was not a planet at the time, but actually what we could call a type of, it was type of round, but it was an oval structure. It was not this round spherical form that we have now. That's just the outer layers of it. We have the whole layers of vertical and horizontal rings that goes around it, which are not part of the magnetic field, but in the other dimensions. So Similarly, as we have different fields behind us, so does our planet actually, which we have talked about in the beginning of this course, and in the end of keeping the psychic energetic balance. So once these energies are to be drawn together, there has to be some kind of event that puts this in motion. It can either be done by technology, or it can be done by two organic life forms. I talk a little bit about this in my older material, but here the event that puts this in motion is the sexual activity of mom and dad that are joining their fields together in sexual activity. And this is where you can really say that once the genitals meet up together and the male penetrates the female, and he releases his sperm, he's releasing a boost of type of energy that merges in with the female field that is also around her genitalial area and her uterus, which is connected to earlier types of racial grids, typically an elemental being. And that elemental being is a biofield elemental that is then drawn into activation because of the connection of the sperm and the cell in the human activity, the sexual intercourse. But that only happens, it doesn't happen, what you can say, right at the intercourse, because we know that the sperm has to travel a little bit up before it breaches the cell and creates the zygote. But the zygote in the female, that is when the sperm and the egg cell are merged together and you begin to have the cell division right there. For that process to happen, you have to have the elemental connected to it. And that elemental is part of the original LPF1 reality field network, but it is as imbued with scattergenetics, and it is what we call residual energies of earlier human life forms that used to be here, but now altered and drawn together into different forms of technologies. The moment the elemental on that level, it is a biofield elemental, comes to life, it begins a sort of, it looks like kind of convulsions, like it's going it sheds off a type of energy because it gets activated. It has no mind, it has no nothing. It's just some kind of gobbly, octopusy kind of weird thing that are in the racial grids. And as that comes to life, there's this slight echo of the original LPF1 energies that were part of the original 1-7 pillar. And it activates slightly what we call some of the original holographic blueprint levels that have been used, or holographic levels that have been used in these extraterrestrial inserted type of technologies. The moment that things come to life, cubes are drawn in, and then it aligns with that elemental being, and then it drags out this energy that is the code fields that are to create the biofield. And I know how it sounds, but this is how it happens. And then that is manifested into reality. And that is then connected to the zygote. So the zygote, or the merged sperm and cells, and an egg cell, then have the codes from the male sperm, which are the XY combination. And then you have the XX combination from the females, and they begin to blend together. And that generates technically what we call the biofield. But as that is connected, then it actually also connects to an astral elemental, as well as a mental elemental. That's difficult to say. And you find evidence of this again in the Bailey material. I think it's in a teacher's on Cosmic Fire, where she's just en passant in the middle of something, mentions that the three lower fields, the astral field and the astral emotional field and the mental field, hold, as well as the etheric fields, hold these elemental beings that are actually fueling these fields. Well, are these elementals then ours, as in kind of, I have my elemental and you have yours? Well, there are the racial elementals that are kind of the original LPF1 network. that are part of the planetary system, but they, as these individual fields are being created, they are just being fueled by these joint collective elementals. That's also why we can have the collective emotional field and the part of the collective consciousness field that is divided into mental and emotional processes where we can affect each other because we are technically connected to the same main elemental. And if you kind of think it's a little bit nice little thing, it's not. It's as big as the planet itself. It's kind of, these things are, there are many of them, but they are kind of connected all over the planet as a network of these weird elemental beings. Similar as if you take a neuron and you look at it, they kind of look a little bit like that, but on a much, much larger scale and made out of something differently, which is impossible for me to explain. So this is kind of how that one comes in play. And I know it sounds a little bit far-fetched and it is difficult to explain. I'm trying to explain what I see and what I sense and what I've experienced so many times. But there is this weird, what we can kind of call the original elementals, then divide into smaller elementals that then become what we could call middle. You have the original large planetary elemental, then become, divides itself into what we could call a lesser version of itself, which technically then blast into different forms of energetic parasites that are then connected to the human DNA and the cellular structure. And this is again on a much, much higher level. And it's part of the distortion fields. And there are energetic beings and you can keep cleaning them out. But as long as you have DNA that replicates itself and you have RNA, the messenger RNA that keeps altering the DNA, well, then you will continuously have these elemental beings that recreate themselves. But when we talk about the ones that are really controlling what we create, the ego structure, then you will discover that what we typically see as the inner child actually is a very large elemental being, but that is on the surface, that is connected to our the emotional field, on the more subtle layers, and you will eventually get rid of that one. And once you get rid of that one, you will see that you will mainly just be dealing with what we call the smaller types of energetic parasites that arise from the cubes and the insertion technologies, as well as the collective fields and other people that will load off their jumping entities as they are drawn into your field for clear out these entities. When they are ready to go, they will look for people that are actually able to clear them out, which is why I'm constantly drawing in different forms of parasitic entities when I get in contact with other people, because my fields are so activated that they blend with other people's fields, and then what can jump and will come my way for me to clear out. But it will still be recreated in the people they have left, because these entities are not particularly clever. So in a way to really get rid of this, it has to be something that the factions decide that I can clear out. And then I can clear out whatever the factions have got inside the physical form that is part of the emotional and mental fields, as well as the biofield. But then it's all about taking out the technologies and taking out everything behind in the clone structures and what have you, that they have been used to operate via the human operator they have inside this reality. But again, I never really know if it really affects people, because this is typically on the layers that goes with either what we call density 2 or density 3, or from the fourth level and up, which is often outside the individual field of each human. And since most humans are still struggling with their lower field energies, they are not really detecting that something they have not even come in contact with has been released from them. Eventually, this is what the new grand cycle will do as well. And then people will just deal with what is in their 3 lower fields up to the level of what we call energetic parasites, and not further than that, because that will be completely taken away, since it's not part of the planetary level. So the new grand cycle will naturally clear out these large elemental beings, And in that also take out that technology that is creating human species in another life form, as in the mother literally building a child out of her own energy. That technology will in the future completely disappear as this extraterrestrial technology dismantles due to the elemental beings are gone, since the level that they use from the Pillar project, the LPF1 level network, will be completely destroyed and cease to exist, and which is why we are now having different forms of grays and different forms of extraterrestrial races that are coming in with new technologies, which in the future will not need a female to brew a child inside her womb, but will be done artificially, which many of the grays and the hybrid projects are already doing. They don't need the female anymore. They have had enough of humans on board. They know exactly how we are made, and they are now creating that in vitro and using different forms of I don't know what's called in English, I forgot the word there, but you kind of have these silos where you can literally brew a child and draw these things together and create it artificially. Similarly, as humans in our reality is now working on creating stem cell meat and growing tissue and all these kind of things. It's a simple thing. You can do it. You just need the right type of energy. You just need the stem cells, and you need the right type of organic matter. And then you can literally 3D print a kidney or a brain or what have you. And it's the same technology on a more advanced level that brews a clone and brews a human being, from where you can then insert different forms of fields that will make it a more living being as we understand it. So this is again extraterrestrial technology, which we are light years away from truly understanding. So in that field is coded in the 3-field blueprint is coded. And at dot number 2, we have the merging, which I explained here to very elaborately. And then number 2, then the 3-field blueprint is coded by circulating energies coding from the past life lower fields. This is where, when everything begins to be drawn in via that dynamic, these extraterrestrial technologies that are using the contraction, that are drawing in these different energies that are connected to different elemental beings and parasitic beings, following literally from the whole level of the LPF2 network going into the visitor, the colonizers going into the world corners. But technically, when we talk individual beings, we are going from the 6th level astral entities and elementals using LPF2 fragments, because these are the regressed races. The hijackers are part of the regressed races. And then the parasitic level, lower astral material, collective consciousness, subconscious and unconscious electrochemical processes. So that is all of the energies that are being drawn in to create these layers in the emotional field, in your biofield, and in the mental field. So the past life codes regulate the cellular blueprint and the content of the emotional and mental fields. So this is technically when it's that kind of when mom and dad are having sex and the zygote comes to life after a couple of days. It's not always happening right away. The sperm has to crawl its way up into the uterus, but the womb and meet with the egg inside the womb of the female. Well, then it's once that has happened and the code layer is in place, then the above level is then activating, pulling out the template from what we call not the original library, but the different storage units that the extraterrestrial races are having on our planet, where they are recirculating certain template structures, sometimes even chopping up the templates and using them to create different forms of humans that are and have been part of different reality settings that are similar to ours, but on other what we call parallel type of Earths. And some of it is only just using template genetics that are put into an artificial construction that is playing out a complete scenario of a life only using one template genetic. But instead of having it in an organic form, they keep it in a completely artificial environment as a type of avatar in a computer game, something like that. but it is again extraterrestrial technology, and it's very difficult to explain, even though I know how it looks, I know how it operates, and I know what's made of, but we simply don't have the words for me to be able to really explain how it is. And once you see this, you will know exactly what I'm talking about, but this is for you to discover yourself if you're able to go up so far into the fourth dimension and the artificial realities from where these extraterrestrial races are having their technologies that are controlling our reality field and the humans inside of it. So the cubes are then in the fourth dimension of these artificial realities under the hijacking races. So, but since the template is then being drawn in and attached to our field, but still completely sealed off and not activated, but it's still there, because if there is no template, there is no life. That is part of what creates life. Life force comes from the viable genetics in the template. So if there's no template, there technically is no life as we know of it that is connected to consciousness. We can have clones that have lower fields, but they are not connected to consciousness, and they're not progressing whatsoever. They are connected to programs and cubes, and it's the cube that feeds them with what you would see as a kind of developmental process, as we see it in a clone child that grows up and becomes a human, and grows up and becomes an adult, and then live in an amount of years. But that human is only undergoing different processes because these are the parasites in that clone human that are mimicking a sort of existence that is then being put into a conglomerate we call the ego structure, that is then unfolding different forms of emotional energies and different forms of mental energies. Not much mental capacity. Clones in our reality field are mostly enormously emotional, and they are deliberately put here to become these over-emotional beings, of which quite a lot of them eventually bulk out and become enormously I'm not saying that everybody who suffers from obesity is a clone, but I am definitely saying that anyone who suffers from obesity have an enormous high level of energetic parasites that are connected to the emotional field. We are seeing a lot of people that do suffer from obesity, even though if it's what do you call it? Forgot the level that you have this sugar order disease, forgot what it's called, but you know what I'm talking about, level 2 or level 1, where you can say, well, it's kind of a genetic malfunction. They are still overproducing insulin in their pancreas. They are still creating what we call disorderly type of energies, which will then eventually come out as obesity, come out as wrongful use of glucoses, wrongful use of ATP, and wrongful use of processing insulin, which means that you get this disease, which I can't remember what it's called, and it doesn't matter because you know what I'm talking about. It is sugar related. You know what it's called. I'll remember it eventually after, but that's because I'm not to go down the line of diseases and what they're made of. I'm just throwing it in there so you kind of understand that parasites, energetic parasites, can mimic life force, and by that actually make a human that is walking around in reality appear as if they are a human, but in fact they are a clone, and they are run by energetic parasites, and at top of that they often have an insectoid attachment in the fourth dimension that are using them like dolls. And that reminds me so much of Men in Black, and you know, this alien that comes in, insect, a huge insect, a cockroach that comes in and put on a human dress, right? So this is not so far-fetched. The ones that made Men in Black are not completely out of line with some of the things that are actually going on. To a large degree, there is a truth to these movies. Okay. So, but past life codes are put into play, because they're part of the template and what has been used in past lives, because these templates are being used again and again and again, and they accumulate via the feedback systems. And that I will explain later when we go into the template work sciences, where I'll begin to explain how the template actually works, and we'll take it there. Just know now that whenever a template is put in and connected to an organic vessel inside our reality, whatever's going on will be coded in and affect the template, which means that eventually it will wear out, and which is why they are putting them in storage where they get loaded up, but they never clear out the distortion fields, which eventually means that a template will wear out of variable genetics, which is why I keep referring to depends on how many times your template has been in use, because if it has been overly used, excessively misused inside this reality, there will be very little viable genetics left, and it will begin to dismantle the moment you begin to try and activate the template level. The different sealing offs, which we will work with as well in the basic activation course or class, is also part of trying to keep the template intact, but also preventing it from activating into the lower fields. But this is a whole other level of information that has to be dealt with on its own level, and not here where we're working with the blueprint that technically creates what we call a human. And I know it's an enormous amount of information to take in. I'm just putting it in there so you kind of have the background, the even further background level that goes with the fourth quote unquote etheric field, which is not really talked much about, but that's the highest level that technically generates what we understand as life force. And in our clearing processes, we're getting back to that level. And once you get to that level, then these 7 layers of that fourth etheric field is actually the first, it's the highest level that creates the etheric field or the code systems behind the other 3 fields. That is when you will connect to this level of understanding and work your way through these 7 layers until you get to the moment of your birth, so to speak, as a zygote, where the 2 cells merge together. And once you clear that one out, you're technically removing yourself from the reality field. And from that moment, you technically cease to exist inside this reality as a recirculating, reincarnating entity. That is the process that we have to kind of go through to really clear ourselves out of this reality field. So this is why I'm putting it in here. But at this point, when you begin to work on that level, you have worked with your mental field, your emotional field, and your biofield, and know and understand the dynamics of clearing processes and technologies, which will make it easy for you to see these levels. But it is enormously advanced type of technologies we're talking here that are beyond the human conception. So this is why it's not easy for us to conceptualize. It's not easy for us to visualize. And we can only truly visualize it when you have encountered it and seen it for on your own, if you will ever get there, because that demands template layer consciousness structure to be able to see these technologies. Again, nothing is easy. So the number 4, the code layers from the past lives also determine the type of genetic fragments in the 3 lower fields. That's the past lives you have had inside this reality determines what type of regressed genetic fragments that are drawn into your lower fields. Again, determining what you will be connected to of programs, determining what you will be connected to of emotional features, what type of mental structures you will have, what type of cognitive processes you will be allowed to do and able to do, and onward and so forth. And the more worn out your template is, the lesser functional you will be in what we can kind of say in higher order types of dynamics. You will be more centered in the lower order type of dynamics and literally just be within the regression spiral and doing the deroot, which means a lot of illness, a lot of genetic disorders, a lot of autoimmune diseases, a lot of defragmentation, a lot of decay symptoms, a lot of crystallization, and all of these things. So in a way, you can say the worst state that your body is in, since you now understand how the higher layers of your emotional field and eventually the higher layers of your mental field actually effectively affect your cellular structure, you will also understand that all sorts of diseases are either from the mental and emotional field, higher layers, or from the underworld that are surfacing up and creating different forms of ailments and diseases. You can say diseases are typically connected to earlier contaminated levels of our planetary reality fields, aka from the underworld, energies and entities that rises up and takes form and possesses the human form, creating viruses and different form of bacterial infections. Whereas when we talk about the kind of autoimmune diseases, glandular diseases, all sorts of diseases that are connected to the intestines, the glands, the organs, the cells, including cancer. All of these are symptoms of cellular dysfunction that goes with the emotional field and the layers of the emotional field. When we talk about mental disorder, neurological diseases, weird diseases in your central nervous system, brain diseases, brain tumors, what have you, is then connected to disorderly functions in the fields around and behind what creates the brain, which we will talk about in the mental field, the advanced work with the mental field. So you can kind of divide it up in that way, that when you have things that comes in and expresses itself as fever, kind of infections, viruses that comes in that way, that is typically contaminated levels from earlier realities and past lives as well. But you are more or less prone for certain types of diseases because of your past lives. But these are all connected to earlier existences and contaminated levels of the racial grids that are part of the biofield, expressed into microbial, bacteria, as well as viruses. Viruses are typically something that comes from outside, but this is transferred via what we could call the planetary types of energies that are part of our reality, that's part of the collective field of all humans that exist on our planet, which is why we can infect each other and be carriers of different forms of viruses, including jumping from animals and into humans, because they are also connected to the same elemental beings, the same biofield, the same blueprint. And when we talk about whatever is going on in our intestine, cellular level, glands and organs, then we have the emotional field, everything that's doing with the neurological diseases, mental field. It's quite simple, and it's once you really understand that dynamic in your self-healing processes, you will be able to target your healing on the correct level that you are working on to find the root of the decay mechanisms, the crystallization mechanisms in your emotional field that leads to different forms of cellular disorder, symptoms, whatever that means in your emotional field, as well as in the mental field, once you're able to work with that one. That goes with the infected and the LPR3 level. So I'm not really going to work with that because that is a whole other arena when we talk about clearing out the mental field and the diseases that are coming from different forms of infected types of genetics that are part of the template layer as well. Anyways, again, moving beyond a little bit what I want to explain here, but just so you know that the weaknesses we have inside this reality in our physical form, emotional field, and mental fields are because of the code layers from past lives. So the more people have been in circulation inside this reality, the less juice they have in their template, and therefore the lower fields are not very viable, and therefore they are prone to all sorts of diseases, all sorts of decay mechanisms, all sorts of crystallization mechanisms, and have issues with repairing themselves and are quickly taken out by different forms of diseases. When they get hit by these diseases, they often become terminal quite quickly because there literally is nothing original life force in them to fight it off. Unless, of course, they're enormously parasitic, energetic parasitic, then the parasites, energetic parasites, will be fueled by the TG mechanisms and the different forms of technologies they're connected to. So it's not a simple picture there either. From this, number 5, the emotional layer unfolds the coding from the past lives into patterns in your emotional field by drawing in distortion energies from the racial grids and the LPF2 networks. This also generates the perimeter of the cells, which we have already worked our way through. So now you have the deeper layers of how that comes to be. And when I say LPF2 networks, of course, I refer to the regressed ones, but also in the 6th dimension, you do have the original mammal levels that could connect to the original LPF2 network that did not go under the regression dynamics, which are part of the middle domain of our LPF1 field. Again, the understanding of how these different networks intersect with each other. Number 6, these levels hold the energetic interaction potentials in the energetic patterns in both the mind field and the emotional field. Interaction potentials, as you remember from our older material and the whole basic ideas, are what will be mirrored in other people as a response to what you hold in your field. That is typically or technically also principle 4. That reality mirrors back to you what you need to work with. These are energetic interaction potentials. So that determines people that you draw into your vicinity, experiences, events, energies, energetic parasites. It goes from the highest to the lowest level of your existence. That what you're composed of will be what you will see, will be part of your relative reality perception, and will be part of the energies around you and where you live and where you're born and all of these kind of things. That is connected to your type of energy fields that you're having. And this is typically also what's called karma. Right? So that determines where people are born. So this is also part of it. So you can say, well, if when we say when you're born, I hereby mean what template that are being drawn in. But it's not that simple as in kind of if you have a template that's in the northern countries, will that be drawn to a pair that are producing a child in Africa? Never. Because the factions have their own templates that are determined by jurisdictions, which are determined by races, which are determined by countries. And these factions are in a higher or lesser state of regression themselves. They are more or less imbued with energies from the third cycle, and by that are more or less what we call dark entity infused from the LPO3 network, or more what we call fourth dimensional entities, insectoid, avian type of creatures, which again is defining the factions of the different countries where the templates are in the storage units in their type of fourth dimension, because the fourth dimension has many different zones as well that are connected to the different factions, that are connected to the different jurisdictions, that are connected to the different parts of our planetary map that is divided into countries. And these are connected to different types of racial grids, or the APINs, the planetary holographic type of networks that the different races have intersected into the original LPF1 networks and grid structure to be able to have their functionality here and to create their types of humans, holding their type of TGs, holding their type of technologies, their type of programs, and their type of energetic parasites, and all of the things that they need to do whatever they're doing here. And eventually all of this, of course, determine the possibility rate of progression, which means that the lesser viable genetics from the template, the lower level of life force, the lesser ability for progression. And so the possibility rate is determined of how many times you put in, how many times you have reincarnated, how long you have been on this planet, and how much the factions that have owned this template have used it or misused it, because some of the templates they have kept in storage and only pull them out of the closet once every 1,000 years or something, and others they are putting in within a 6-year cycle or a 100-year cycle, keep repeating this until they wear out and cease to exist. And again, this is what eventually just becomes the foundation of clones, and then that's the root. And once that is happening, they become very parasitic, and then these energies will fall apart, be absorbed by the underworld energies, and become part of the contamination levels of the lower levels of the planetary fields. And this is kind of how it goes. Okay, so above and below and these dynamics. I know it's a very quick run through, and you will probably after this feel a little bit kind of blasted with very high forms of energies, and it will probably not mean much to you. But similarly to when we have science, we explain the quantum fields to be able to explain how atoms come to be and virtual atoms come to be, because they grow out of that field. And that's the same dynamic you're having here, but what controls these fields, what controls these mechanics, and what are creating the four etheric field or the biofields on its four levels, with the top level is what I here have explained, the blueprint of your very existence that is determined by the type of energy your mom and dad are having, and what is drawn in of what they are is from the storage, the template level, whether it's a complete template or a partial template or just sections of a template, little scraps of a template has been divided, will then be drawn into play, connect to that elemental being, and from that life begins on our planet, and then it's built up via number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and all of that in the end determines your possibility rate of progression when you're doing this work. So in that, you can make a better outcome for yourself in the clearing work. You can be in a very severe state of complete crystallization and decomposition. But if only you have one viable genetic, remember they're holographic. So if you are able to do clearing work, and if you do that, it might take a long time, but there will be the more you clear out, the more you get to the bottom of whatever is creating the crystallization, whatever is creating the decay mechanisms, whatever creates the entropy, whatever is constantly distorting you and derailing you or pulling all different forms of technologies in. The more you get on top of that and learn to clear it out, eventually you will begin to create a sort of life force yourself, which will assist you in this work. I'm not saying you're going to go to the sixth dimension, probably not, but you might create enough life force and with that enough consciousness to be able to work the way back to clear out your nodal point connection to the scattered and destroyed LPF1 network, which are part of our planetary setting and planetary construction as it is now under the extraterrestrial races and their technologies. And by that, move yourself out of what is keeping what they are having of you in their storage. You can technically track back if you are able to go to the level where you were created and go back through the tract that pulled your consciousness structure, which is part of a template. You will also go to the extraterrestrial levels, artificial realities, where they are keeping a portion of your template storage or different forms of genetics in plasma vials, and you will be able to connect to these and dismantle them. This is part of the work that is possible to do as well. But again, demands an enormous advanced understanding of how to work with energy, how to work with the different layers you're made of. And for now, most of you will just work with the emotional field and learn to deal with that in itself, which is many years of inner work and many years of clearing work. It is not done easily. Remember, I'm in my 50s. I've been doing this since I was a kid, since I was born technically. And I am born in with a slight understanding of being different, of having the observer point of view and always feeling different. And I have not been circulated to the same degree as many of you have that are doing this work. Many of you go back to the hijacking and you have circulated inside this reality ever since. I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm just saying this so you are realistic in the work that you are doing, so that you kind of know, okay, this is perhaps a little bit more complicated than what you thought. But you're not giving up because you still need to do this. It comes as an imperative from within. You cannot ignore it, and you have to follow the pull of whatever's left of viable genetics in you that either needs to be reactivated and get into recreating what you need, can be recreated, or begin the complete dismantling process so you ensure that you will not be drawn to the parallel systems that will use the remains of our solar system once the original true human technologies and reality field grid works and networks and genetic library and everything that is part of the construction that we build in the Pillar Project, Once the new grand cycle has cleaned all of that out, there will only be left what the extraterrestrials have put there. And then this solar system on that level will become part of their parallel systems and drawn there due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity. And it's our job to ensure that we don't get drawn there either. Whatever is drawn there is entirely in alignment with these parallel realities and has changed to become part of these parallel realities, but not what remains and were part of the original Pillar Project. With that one set there, blasting through this, take a little bit of break before you go into the energy work videos, the last 2 videos of this course. And remember, there's much, much more information to be given. We have the advanced work on the mental field. We have the more advanced work on the rotundum, the advanced work with food and exercise. If I can get these 2 courses done, they're still a little bit uncertain, but there's definitely an advanced work with the rotundum where you can use the advanced work on the emotional field, connecting to that. And then there's the template work classes. There are the basic activation classes, and there are the basic timeline work classes. So I am working through all of the layers and getting into more and more details, so it becomes more and more clear to you what this actually means. All of the foundation we laid in the basic whole ideas and the basic whole books is now being explored and explained into much, much more complexity and details, from where you will really begin to understand the dynamics and the architecture of who and what you actually is. Thank you.